This is a Toyota 60 Series Landcruiser, and this is a 2011 BMW X5. This X5 has an N57 and a ZF 8-speed in it, which are arguably the two most reliable parts of the car. Welcome to Kincrome Buildwars, and my plan for this series is to take the motor out of the BMW X5 and put it into that 60 Series Landcruiser.
5 teams, 5 unique builds. We've gathered a bunch of our great mates to take on Tasmania's toughest terrain, testing their skills, their rigs, and their resilience, all in support of men's health this Movember. This is Kincrome Buildwars.
Kincrome has given me 20k cash to build a 4-wheel drive to take down a Tassie to wheel some of the toughest tracks in the country. I'm up against Aussie Arvos, TJ and Mac, Uncle Pooley and Team Kincrome. Make sure you go check out their channels to see exactly what they're building. We've been given 3 months to complete the build, so the timeline is tight. We're also allowed to have 5k in sponsored parts and 5k in parts lying around the shed each, bumping the budget to 30k all up. Each team is going to release 3 build videos and 1 trip video of Tasmania over the next 4 weeks. And on my channel, you can expect a full build series on a 60 Series Landcruiser with a turnkey N57 engine swap with plenty of accessories that we designed and built to suit. In this video, we get cracking on the engine conversion and get the motor mounted up. And of course, we make some custom bits. The car that I want is a 60 Series Landcruiser, and I absolutely love the look of them. They have a striking appearance, especially in comparison to some of the latter Landcruiser counterparts. I also want a tourer. I've got a tough tourer, and we're building a hard wheeler, so I need something a little more practical, something that I can daily. And I'm building this 60 knowing full well it won't be as capable as an 80 or a Patrol, but if I'm sinking 3 months of my life into a build, it has to be something that I actually want to keep and drive. This series gives me an opportunity to show you what is possible on a budget if you're making absolutely everything yourself. It's going to show you, as a viewer, how long custom work actually takes, as I'll be tallying up all the labour in the budget. Let me tell you a story about how I got my cars. As per usual, with any project I tackle, I started off really ambitious. The car that I actually want is an N57 60 Series on an 80 Series chassis. Retain the look of a 60 Series with the capability and comfort of an 80 and the power and drivability and fuel economy of an X5. Sounds like a pretty good combo to me. I started by getting myself a wrecked 80 Series for $1,800. I've acquired the first of 3 cars, so this is an 80 Series Landcruiser, so it's a great donor for the chassis. Got a coil spring chassis obviously, and it's already been pulled apart for me, which is awesome. So all I've got to do today, take the body off and keep the chassis. Basically going to retain everything underbody, like tail shafts, transfer. Hopefully we can swap that out for $79. I managed to sell the gearbox and transfer for $550, meaning the 80 chassis came to $1,250 all up, which is pretty reasonable. On to the second of 3 vehicles, the X5. People in Melbourne seemingly wanted drug money for their X5s. I was trying my absolute best to get a bargain, but everyone seemed to know what they had. This was one of my favourite interactions. This particular bloke had listed an X5 for 10 grand, but it was in pretty rough shape and it had been up for a while. He didn't want a bar of me, and it made me particularly happy over the coming months when he dropped the list price to $6,500. Pretty close to the cash offer I suggested months prior. Not that I'm bitter about it or anything. Anyway, moving on to how I actually got my X5. Maybe the N/M57 conversion bug hasn't hit Sydney yet because they seem to be cheaper up there. I found one that I wanted for $5,500 and I jumped on a plane and flew up to Sydney. Good evening, Build Wars legends. I have just flown up to Sydney and I've just spent 2.5 hours walking to save a $50 Uber ride. I'm about to see my X5 for the first time, so hopefully it's good and I can drive it back to Melbourne tonight. I should be home by 3 AM. So yeah, just letting you know what sort of extent I'm going through to save some money on this build. 10 of those Uber rides and I could potentially buy a locker, so this thing is going to be tight. I'm just pulling into Melbourne now and I've been on the highway at 110 k's an hour and it's been doing 8 litres per 100 and it just drives so smoothly. I'm absolutely stoked. So the powertrain in this car is absolutely brilliant. There are little niggles with the car. It is kind of like falling apart a little bit around it, like the rattles and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the actual engine and gearbox, I'm so happy with it. It's super smooth. It almost feels like, you know, a petrol motor. And bang for buck, like this whole car was $5,500. It honestly astounds me. I'd seriously consider getting one of these as a daily. Yeah, ripper of a vehicle. So that's how I got my X5, and I'm going to be explaining why I selected an N57 later on in this video. Onto the 60 now, and this one was the most challenging one of the lot. At first, when I was looking, I thought I could get a decent rust-free one for around the 3 to 5k mark. And that's what I'd budgeted so I could make the chassis swap happen as well. The one that I had my eye on for 3 grand sold, and seemingly there were no other 60s on Marketplace for a reasonable price that were in the condition that I wanted. Then I stumbled across this absolute gem, which was initially listed for 23k, but I got him down to 7. This effectively meant that I overspent on the 60 series, and this changed everything for me. My dream 60/80 build just wasn't going to be possible within the budget, and we only had 3 months to get these cars ready for Tassie, and I'd already burnt a lot of time lowballing people on Marketplace. I mean, finding suitable donors already. And I also have other commitments outside Buildwars, so I can't be working on a car 24/7. So I decided to reduce the scope of the project a little, and I'm not putting it on an 80 series chassis. The 80 chassis is now a future project, and I have all the parts to do it, and it will happen on this channel eventually, so make sure you subscribe if you'd like to see that. Let's have a quick look at the cars that I picked before we start swapping the engines. This is my 2012 BMW N57 X5, which comes with a turbo diesel straight 6-cylinder 8-speed. All right, let's have a good old look at this X5. So I do think it's a little bit too nice to wreck. I got it for an absolute bargain. Now the inside is quite nice. The bolsters have started to go, but that's kind of normal for 215,000 Ks of use. Back's all right. The boot doesn't open and the actuators need replacing, which I think is pretty standard on these things. Honestly, straight as an arrow. The bodywork is in such good condition. And this is my 1986 Toyota 60 Series Landcruiser with a 4-litre straight 6. So it's very common for 60 series to be rusted out. Now this has had a repaint at some point in time. You can see the overspray through there. One of the big things in a 60 is to look for rust in the gutters. Pretty good. So I think this is actually in original form without any rust repair, which is unreal. And then look on the bottom of the doors is another part I've been told, I haven't actually seen, that wears out, and that's good as well. So as far as actual rust goes in this thing, it doesn't look like there is any. Okay, so let's talk about some of the undesirable things in this car. Got the 3F auto, so the 3F not so crash hot. It's petrol, so people look for the H's, so that's why I picked this car up slightly cheaper. The other thing is it's an auto. I'm not sure how they go, but it doesn't feel super good. I mean, it is quite an old car, I guess. Actually, the trim is in pretty good condition, like the door cards. I'm pretty happy with that. The seats in not so bad condition. It smells in here quite a bit, so it could do with a really, really good sort of steam clean or something like that. Now that you know what I'm working with, let's take the BMW X5 engine out and put it into the 60 series. Sounds easy, right? First job is to pull the old motor and driveline out of the 60. I wasn't planning on reusing the exhaust, so we were able to remove it the fast way. Massive shout out to my engineering interns Tom and Sasha, who were helping me out massively with this build. The old motor mounts can now be removed and the angle grinder gets whipped out to prepare the chassis for the new BMW mounts. The chassis was now ready for new mounts and it was time to install the BMW engine. I was really lucky. One of the local wreckers dismantled the BMW for me in exchange for the rolling shell, which would have saved at least a day, if not 2 of labour. They gave me back the engine conversion on a pallet, and from there I could install the Fusion Fab 70 series transfer case adapter. Ash from Fusion Fab has been developing parts for the BMW conversions for the last few years, and I have to say I'm really impressed with the quality. Who doesn't love a big shiny bit of billet aluminium? This transfer case adapter was super easy to install, it just bolted straight up to the 8-speed. Next up, we had to relocate the power steering pump to bring it in a little closer so it wouldn't foul on the chassis rail. These are also brackets that Fusion Fab make up, and the install was also very straightforward. To get the power steering pump to work in its new location, you have to profile the sump a little bit. The old BMW block mounts could be removed before we started to cut out part of the sump for diff clearance. Luckily, there isn't any oil in this part of the sump, it's just structural for the front driveline, but you do have to be really careful because if you go a little bit too far, it could end in tears. Then it was time to install the new block mounts on. If you were to design these from scratch, I would say there'd be around 2 days in it. Overall, the material isn't worth a heap, maybe $100. They'll be on sale at www.lcs4x4.com.au, so if you're after a set of N57 engine mounts, make sure you check it out. The new engine mounts used the mighty Barrett engine rubbers, and once they were installed, we could finally put the BMW engine into the 60 series. If you're wondering why I picked an N57 8-speed, it is coming up later in the video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. We messed around with the engine position for a while until we had adequate clearances for everything. Then we could make up the chassis side engine mounts on the plasma table. As far as I'm aware, there is no N57 8-speed into a 60 series kit. This could be the only one in the world, so we have to make absolutely everything. Once they were mocked up in position, I got a ticketed welder to weld them off. The rattle can comes out for a quick blast and it looks as good as new, and then the engine can go back in, hopefully for the final time. All up, I reckon a fair labour estimate for mounting the engine would be about a week. There's a fair bit in it, and I was lucky enough to have multiple sets of hands helping me, and also I didn't have to pull the engine out of the BMW. While this is possible back in my own shed, and I've done it before, I would be happy never to do it again. So mega shout out to Laurie and the team from LCS 4x4 for helping me out with this. We tacked in a temporary crossmember and then took it home to my shed so I could begin designing and manufacturing a real one. And onto the rear one now. We modelled the chassis rails first, which allowed us to design the crossmember quite easily. This was a relatively tricky part to design out of sheet metal due to the angle of the engine and gearbox. Luckily we had surrogate CAD from past projects, but this still took 10 hours of our time to measure it and design it on CAD. I was able to cut the majority of parts at home in my backyard on the plasma table, but I didn't have any 6mm sheet. LCS 4x4 came to the rescue for this part, and then we were able to start folding it using a V-block die on the 45-ton shop press. This main part of the crossmember was made from 6mm steel, however, the rest of the crossmember was made from a combination of 3 and 4mm, which we were able to fold in the pan brake. Once everything was folded, we could begin welding, and I'd opted to use TIG, well, because I can and I like it more. It does take a little bit longer, however there's no dirty welding splatter, and I think the finished product looks better as a result. Although doing it on a crossmember is kind of pointless because no one will ever see this part. There you have it, a fully custom crossmember we whipped up in the shed to suit an N57 8-speed into a 60 series. You'll notice there's a notch out of the rib at the top for the 79 series transfer case, and on the other side there's drainage holes at the bottom for water and mud. Everything has been triangulated, and the bottom sheet suits our 5-degree engine angle so we don't have to put any extra strain on the rubber bushing mount. After a quick lick of paint, it's ready to go on the car, but first we have to remove the temporary one. How good. You may have noticed there was a transfer case installed in that clip. I'd opted for a second-hand 79 transfer case because they are fully manualised with no transfer case motor, and this set me back $900, which is a pretty good price after I put out a story on my Instagram. Now I could begin installing the new crossmember and the new chassis mounts. I tacked the crossmember in place, and then I got a mate who's a certified welder to weld it off. Whoa, didn't see you there. You may have noticed I'm using a Kincrome brushless impact wrench for this job. It has 1550 Newton meters, which is wild. That's about double as much as this N57 powered 60 series. I've been using this for the past 18 months and giving it absolute hell, making sure every bolt is done up to FT. My favourite feature is the different modes, particularly the auto mode, where the gun knows not to ugga-dugga anymore. These power tools are designed for trade professionals and one battery fits all. Make sure you check them out if you're looking for a set of power tools. Also, Buildwars is for Movember, so donate if you want to support a good cause. We're looking under the car now, and the crossmember is complete. And for the first time, the engine is now on its actual mounts, where it's going to remain. All up, there's probably around $200 worth of material in the crossmember, if you're not paying for full sheets of steel, that is. And there were around 16 hours of labour, including CAD, manufacture and install. So a custom crossmember like this would set you back $2,600 if you're paying someone else to do the work for you. The most challenging part of any engine conversion, in my opinion, is getting the engine to work and essentially tricking it into thinking that it's in its native car. A lot of conversions run aftermarket computers to control either the transmission or the engine, or potentially both. If you're chasing drivability, a lot of the time a factory computer is a much better option because they've been calibrated for tens of thousands of hours in comparison to something aftermarket, which might just be some bloke on the dyno clicking buttons and adjusting maps for a few hours. I want this 60 series to be super drivable, so I'm going with a factory computer. I want it to shift smoothly and I don't care about making crazy power or torque. Luckily for me, the hardest part has been done by Fusion Fab, who have been a massive help with this build. Fusion Fab have developed software and calibrations to allow the X5 motor to run as a standalone engine. All I have to do is mount the computer and run the wires to crank this thing over, which is pretty easy. I want to mount the ECU in the cabin to keep it safe. I know we'll be doing river crossings down in Tassie and there'll be plenty of mud as well, so let me just show you what I've got to work with. Alrighty, so we're looking at the glove box now. We've removed all of the rear liner and the plan is to just mount it up in here. 3D printed a mount, and that's just out of PLA at the moment. We might print it out of something stronger a bit later. Has to be on this angle just because it won't fit otherwise. Alrighty, just to give you an idea of what it takes to develop a part like this, it requires a lot of prototyping. So this is our first version. We tried to get it in flat, but it didn't work. Then we tried an angled version. We had to reduce it by 3 degrees. And then we tried to print it out of ASA. We were pretty confident at that point. And the print wasn't so good down the bottom tabs. It started lifting off the bed. So we tried to print it into a different orientation, which also didn't work. Had some failed holes there. The 3D printers had been working overtime on this build. All of these computer mounts were 10-hour or so prints, and we ended up doing 5 before we got a design that worked. Unfortunately though, that was short-lived because it turned out when we came to wire it that the engine harness didn't work in that position. It was too short. So I had to delete my head unit and do another 2 prototypes to get it to fit in behind the dash. This would allow me to retain the factory engine wiring harness instead of making something custom, which would cost a lot of extra money. The final version was printed from polycarbonate carbon fiber off my new Prusa 3D printer, which seems to be better for more engineering style materials like the PCCF. Honestly, there was probably about 20 hours of labour to get this computer mount done, which seems absurd, and it's pretty hard to charge that out. We burned through a few rolls of various filaments as well, totaling around $200. To make the engine go broom, we're going to need some sort of throttle. Now there are a couple of aftermarket options available and I'm sure you could adapt another pedal if you really wanted to. However, I'm going down the path of least resistance, which is using the existing BMW X5 throttle pedal and adapting that into the 60. This is going to require some sort of bracket, and here's what we have so far. This bracket is made from 3mm steel and it's going to pick up on the existing throttle pedal bolt holes of the 60 series, and you can see there's a bolt hole to mount the BMW pedal in as well. To make it all work, I'll have to flip the BMW pedal upside down to how it was mounted in the X5, but I don't think this is going to be an issue. As per the new norm in my shed, the bracket was designed in CAD, cut out on the plasma table, folded in the pan brake, and then I'd opted to TIG it together because why not? This bracket took around 2 hours to measure, design, manufacture and install. It's probably around $20 worth of material, meaning the RRP for something like this would be $320 for a one-off, but it only cost me $20. That's the throttle pedal complete now, and you can see it almost looks like it was meant to be there. I've also added a little plate at the bottom of the assembly to stiffen the throttle pedal up when you're on the noise. I've got a 70 series transfer case bolted up to the ZF 8-speed, but now we need a way to shift it from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive to low range. The 70 series transfer case I'm using is fully manualized, and the lever needs to be mounted to the gearbox instead of the cab, so it doesn't go shift in the car if the car hits a bump, for example. I've opted to use a 70 series transfer case lever, and we're going to try and use the same linkage so we don't modify it too much. We've got to drill through an open part of the transmission casing, which you'll see, and we can pick up on 2 bolt holes down the bottom. After a few iterations, this is the transfer case shifter bracket we'd come up with. It looks relatively complicated, but it was tricky to package in there and make it work with all the existing geometry limitations. We're making this from 3mm steel on the blue carve plasma table. And we've got to add a few folds on the trusty Machinery House pan brake. So this is V1, V2, V3, and V4, ready to go. We didn't do this off a scan, we just did it off the car, and generally that requires multiple prototypes. Now we had to drill a mounting hole in the top of the transmission casing. As you can see from this video, we can now shift the transfer case between two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, low and high range. The job isn't over yet though. Due to the 79 series lever being different geometry, I have to cut and shut the transmission tunnel. The hole has to be moved further back. And then we're making up a patch panel so the cab remains sealed. Once the patch panel was fully welded in, we could put the transmission tunnel back together and focus on mounting the BMW gear shifter. We had the 3D printed mount from Fusion Fab, but because we were mounting it on an uneven surface, we made an additional mounting plate out of aluminium. This was a pretty simple part with a couple of returns. Let's cut it out on the plasma table. So that's the gear shifter and transfer case shifter all mounted up. It would be pretty easy to print some sort of center console to make it look more finished. However, we're out of time and I've got to get down to Tasmania and go driving. You can put money on there being one created in the future. Perhaps another video for the channel. You're not going to believe it, but the cost for mounting the shifters came to $1,125. There was 6 hours of labour all up, $25 worth of material, and it was $200 for the 70 series transfer case lever. You're probably thinking, why on earth am I using a BMW motor in the 60 series? And that's a fair question. Well, this is an engineering channel, and every decision I make when I'm building something is data driven. So let's have a look at the data on why I selected an N57 engine. Firstly, I really hate it when people say keep it all Toyota. Who cares? OEMs use a heap of different parts from the same suppliers, and I have absolutely no brand loyalty whatsoever. My view on it is just pick the best possible bang for buck engine and transmission. Engines can be made to work in anything within reason, i.e. you can't have a Barra powering an ocean liner. Well, maybe if you had enough of them you could. But a lot of OEMs do power pack engineering, which is where they use the same engine in a small car as like a larger SUV, for example, which makes a lot of sense so they can split development costs between the two models. And we're effectively doing the same thing, just putting it into a 60 series. Let's have a look at this table for potential engine swaps I'd consider in my four-wheel drive. These engines come in a heap of different forms, so I'm really just comparing the base forms in this table. Don't get too hung up on the numbers. You can see immediately that LS, Barra and BMW engines are a lot lighter than the old school mechanical engines, and that's something to take into consideration, especially if you're GVM limited. The Cummins, for example, is 300 kilos heavier than a fully dressed N57. The fuel economy is another thing that I'm taking into consideration with this build, and I've tried my best to make estimates on the information around the internet. But again, don't get too hung up on the numbers. The N and the M57s are very, very good choices when it comes to fuel economy, and they're extremely cheap as well. The costs in this table were based on average secondhand deals that I found on Marketplace, and you can always get a better deal if you look hard enough. I put together these graphs for costs versus torque, and you can see the Barra and the BMW engines are best bang for buck, and when it comes to power, it's no surprise that the petrols win. Let's talk about the transmissions, which is a huge, huge motivator for me behind this particular engine swap. I like manuals, I really do, and I'd run one on a Sunday cruiser car, but the reality is that autos have come a long way over the past 20 or so years. They're better in traffic, they're better for towing, they're more suited to handle more power and torque. They're arguably better for slow speed crawling and four-wheel driving, and they can go faster in a straight line, and they can also prevent damage to your driveline. So honestly, they're quite hard to go past when you're selecting an engine for your four-wheel drive. The best auto in existence is widely considered to be the ZF 8HP, and the predecessor to that was the ZF 6HP, which I personally have in my Barra swapped 40 series, and it is a fantastic transmission. I really want to try out the 8-speed though, and the N57 is one of the only affordable diesel variants that they come native behind, hence a large reason why I've opted for this particular powertrain. You may have heard of the BMW M57 conversions before, and they are very popular and for good reason. While the N57 is lighter and has more power and better fuel economy than the M57 is generally considered to be more reliable and easier to work on. The M57 has an iron block with a timing chain at the front of the motor in comparison to the N57's aluminium block with a timing chain at the back of the motor. There are ways to overcome the problems with the N57 though. The timing chains seem to last around the 200 to 250k mark, so I'd suggest doing one while you're doing the conversion, and then you won't have a problem for a long time. People also suggest running a slightly thicker oil to overcome the crank bearing issues. I've spent a lot of time in an N57 converted car, and I was super impressed at how it drove in comparison to the M57. The M57 almost felt agricultural in comparison. So perhaps the ultimate combo could actually be the M57 paired with the 8-speed, which is possible, but you've got to pay an extra $1,000 for an adapter and possibly $3,000 for a computer to control it. And I don't think it will work as well as the N57 8-speed. The N57 8-speed is certainly the easiest and most economical option for a swap if you're looking for an 8-speed transmission. So let's just say you want to stay in the ZF family with your auto to get the best drivability and fuel economy. You really need a 6 or an 8-speed behind your engine. If you were to have the 1VD, the 1HD, the Cummins, the LS3, or any other engine for that matter, you would need to buy an 8-speed, buy an adapter, a standalone computer to make it all work, and you're looking at a minimum of $8,000. Now the Barra and the M and the N57 all come native with 6 or 8 speeds respectively, meaning they are far more economical to do conversions with. Let's have a look at these adjusted graphs if you were to include the cost of putting an 8-speed behind your engine. It becomes very clear who the winners are for budget builds because you don't need the additional computers or hardware to run the ZF boxes. One of the big arguments for the older style engines is that they're more reliable because they're all mechanical, no sensors. I'd argue that if you carry a scan tool and spare sensors required, the modern engines can be just as reliable. My Barra swap has been to just about every corner of Australia and it's never been near a tow truck. I don't really want to cover modifications when you start modifying all of these engines because it does get super complicated and I could probably do a whole YouTube episode on it. But the M and the N57 and the Barra respond very well to flash tunes and very simple hardware changes. It's quite easy to get a lot more power out of these engines for not very much cost. Now, given the 60 is built to be a tourer, not a hard wheeler, the N57 makes a lot of sense. I don't need the wheel speed like I would in a hard wheeler. I've managed to save some serious dollars and keep this thing within budget, and I have no doubt it's going to drive awesome. That's the end of this video. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night to TJ and Mac's channel to see them build a Cummins Swap GU. It's going to be an absolute banger. Next video on the N57 60, I button up the whole engine conversion and get the engine started for the first time.